Singapore has reported one of the highest infection rates in Asia, but less than 0.1% of the patients in Singapore have died due to the Wuhan virus. Despite an aging population, Singapore has been able to mount a fairly effective response to the coronavirus outbreak. But there are concerns, the recent spike in confirmed cases and new infections among the migrants. To discuss the present situation and more, I'm joined by K Shanmugam, Singapore's Minister for Home Affairs and Law. Thank you very much for taking out the time. We're looking at the numbers. A few weeks ago, we were looking at Singapore as one of the success stories of this outbreak. But recently, we've seen a spike in new cases. What's the situation now?
You know, when people were saying Singapore was successful, we took great pains to say, look, this is a long fight, and we are in the middle of the fight, and there is no such thing as success being declared at this point. We were very clear that this is a virus, the nature of it was not clear, and until a vaccine comes, it's going to be a long fight. If you were to look at it in two periods, until about April 7th, 8th, we had a total of maybe about 1,000 plus infections. We are at close to 19,000 as of today. So that's a big spike, and most of it has come from infections amongst our foreign worker, guest worker community. We have looked at the reasons why that has happened. And the spike, we think primarily has come about because they have communal living. They live in dormitories. We have about 43 purpose-built dormitories in Singapore. About 200,000 of them live in these dormitories. The biggest ones are slightly more than 20,000 people. There are also factory-converted dormitories, which house a smaller number, about 100,000 or so. And then another few 100,000 live in private residential premises. But because of the communal living, they live together, they eat together, they sleep in about 8 to 10 per room in bunk beds. They socialize together, and on the weekends, up to 100, 150,000 of them can come together in specific places in Singapore. So that's the reason why there has been a tremendous spread. But thankfully, because of the medical intervention, and many of them are healthy, our fatality rate is low. In fact, so far amongst the foreign workers from India, there hasn't been a single fatality. But, I say as of today. Likewise, we had a Bangladeshi who was seriously ill, but for 2 months, he was in ICU, but we took care of him. We have promised our guest workers a few things. One, the government will waive all levies that are due to it for each worker so that the employers will continue to be able to pay them. And so they will get their salaries even though they are not doing any work. That's a huge relief. The second thing they need to know is, of course, their medical care would be given, and they have been promised good medical care. And that's why I gave you the example of the Bangladeshi worker who was in ICU for 2 months and now has been moved to a general ward. The third thing is, of course, in a situation where they are in their dorms, food. So it's a huge logistics exercise for us, 200,000 meals, 3 times a day. And that's being done. So they get free food, they get their salaries, and they get medical care. And we have also made arrangements for them to be able to call home and be in frequent contact. And then various other amenities for recreation, primarily through TV.
There's a spike of cases in foreign worker dormitories, and that has sparked a concern. There's also been a debate over how Singapore treats its foreign workers. What are the conditions like in the dormitories now?
Can I make a point on that? Can I make another point on that? People mistake the causes. The causes, as I say, are the communal living. We find that in Singapore, the two places where transmission takes place most is at the home and in the workplace. So when you come into contact with people, it transmits. So likewise, these young men, most of them are young, are living together, and that's where the transmission takes place. Yeah, I've asked my people to give you some photographs of some of the dormitories. In 2015, we passed legislation, and there are standards and requirements. In fact, if people look at these dormitories, there's got to be a gymnasium, there's got to be a communal area. Each room has its own bathroom and shower facilities. So it's not the living conditions, but it's a communal living. And it is our duty to take care of them medically, and we will take care of them. And they know that. In fact, survey results haven't been published, but we have done a survey, a scientifically valid survey, that shows that most of them know that they will be taken care of medically, that their salaries, they don't have concerns. Their main concern is whether they will continue to have a job after this is sort of handled.
Singapore did not order a lockdown during the first wave of cases, but now a partial lockdown has been extended up till June. What led to the change in approach?
As I said earlier on, we were managing it and the number of cases were very small, and we were trying to keep as much of normalcy as possible while putting a lot of responsibility on individuals to take care of themselves. But we are 762 square kilometers with a density of about nearly 8,000 plus persons per square kilometer, one of the more urbanized, dense cities in the world of necessity. And once we saw the spike in numbers amongst our guest workers, then the spread across both amongst the guest workers and amongst the population the likelihood is very high. So we had to go for what we call circuit breakers, stop a lot of the non-essential work, ask people to stay at home, and ask the foreign workers to stay at their homes, as in the dormitories, and also in the dormitories where there was a higher prevalence of transmission, to try and keep them apart as much as possible, not to intermix too much within the dormitory itself, between the rooms of the different rooms, the different floors. So we try to put in those measures to try and slow down the spread. And that's why you're seeing these measures. Otherwise, the key is, or let me back up and say, almost everyone's numbers, including ours, are likely to be understated. New York has reported, I think, 300,000 cases, New York City. But the governor estimates that probably the true number is maybe 2.7 million, 2.8 million, because a lot of people are asymptomatic. Likewise, many of the foreign workers, the guest workers that we are testing, are asymptomatic. We are picking them up. We have tested 10% of them. That's the intensity of the testing. When you test a huge number, you will get a very large number of positive results too. So we are testing 10% of the 300,000 in the factory converted in public dorms. And a lot of people who are perfectly fine, who don't feel anything, and who would never have reported sick, are being picked up through our testing. So that partly accounts for the numbers. It also shows where we are heading. We want to test everyone as much as possible, try and make sure that we give treatment. Those who don't need treatment get isolated and observed, and then eventually when they are clear, they get back to wherever they were staying. Or alternate arrangements for staying are also arranged. So this is why we had to change our strategy, because the key in any city, in any place, is that if you look at the statistics, the older people are the ones who get more affected. And so you got to protect your senior citizens. You got to protect the older population. The rest of the society has a greater tolerance. There is probably spread, but again, if you want to stop the spread, you need to do the testing. You need to be able to contact trace. And you can't keep a lockdown, or you can't keep our sorts of restrictions, circuit breaker type restrictions, for a very long period. So you need to make use of technology.
You've taken a tough stand against fake news and social media platforms. What measures are you taking to tackle the disinformation challenge at this time?
Around the world, and I'm sure in India too, this is a very serious problem. I give you one example. A suggestion that if you drink ethanol, you can cure yourself of this. A lot of people in Iran have died as a result. A lot of people have lost their sights, other faculties. This sort of thing is very dangerous, very serious. We have had false photographs circulating, a video circulating supposedly of a Bangladeshi worker who has hung himself. This was in the Middle East some time ago, but that photograph or the video is taken and being circulated here. And when you have a lot of people living in dormitory style and they're already anxious, it raises the anxiety level. It is done purposely to try and rile them up, make them even more panicky, and can create a very dangerous situation. But thankfully in Singapore, because we have had laws against fake news for some time, the serious incidents are much less. And we have had to pull up several cases, and we issue corrections. Sometimes we order takedowns. And so the population knows by and large that fake news would be tackled. And they also have a lot of confidence and trust in official communications as well as the mainstream media.
From February till April, your government unveiled $60 billion in coronavirus relief measures. What will be the impact of the spike in cases on Singapore's economy, and is your government planning another stimulus?
By the way, $60 billion is 60 billion Singapore dollars. It's a tough situation because effectively, as a result of the virus, all economic activity, or most economic activity, has come to a halt. Business can't be done, both internationally as well as within Singapore. It's not unique to Singapore, it's the case everywhere. Many countries are projecting a recession, a downward trend. Many economists think that Singapore's economy would also be seriously affected, and that's a fair assessment. And during this period, we need to come in and help people fight through. Now, no one knows how long this is going to last. And we have already made it clear that on top of the 60 billion, if it lasts longer, as is the assumption by most people, then we will have to do more. We'll have to do what it takes. Our approach has been threefold. One is put money on the table for self-employed and to give companies up to 75% of the salaries they are paying to their employees up to a limit. It's not 75% or whatever sum you earn, 75% of specified sum, which is linked to the median income. And we are also giving a whole lot of other sorts of assistance to both companies and individuals for them to see through this period. The second way in which we've helped is the central bank came in together with the major financial institutions to give relief in terms of interest payments and principal payments for people. The third way in which we have helped is we have put in legislation very quickly in Parliament and passed it earlier this month to effectively suspend payment obligations in certain types of contracts. For example, commercial contracts. There is no business, and how do people pay rental, for example? So we have said that if they can't pay rental, they will be given extra time. We have set up panels of assessors to assess the validity of these claims, whether they really cannot pay or they don't want to pay. If it's a big multinational, then we would say, you've got to pay. But a company that has been affected by COVID and is unable to pay will be able to get relief, wait for a while before it makes payment. And a few other contracts. For example, one common example is people have booked a hotel for wedding. The couple have paid a deposit, and now they say, well, the government says you can't have these functions, the hotel cannot proceed. what happens to the deposit? The poor couple lose the deposit. So that won't be fair. So we have arranged for a number of ways in which we can intervene. And we may have to do more.
How do you see India's response to the coronavirus outbreak so far?
I have to say, I don't know enough because I've been very focused on what we are doing. But from what I'm reading in the newspapers, what I'm reading in international media, I have to say it's the results are surprising because, India has reported 40-odd thousand. That's probably an underreporting because, as I said, it depends on how many you test. And a lot of people are asymptomatic. And in a country like India, how do you test any substantial number, right? But the fatality rate is very low. I mean, I read the figure as being, 1,400 or so as of now. That probably many people will agree is also probably understates, but it cannot be by much because you will look at the hospitals, you will look at the mortuaries, you will look at the general rates of people passing away. So even if it's understated, nevertheless, it's a very, very low figure. It's at about 0.1%. That's quite amazing. I think that's because the government moved in very quickly and imposed lockdowns. That has caused some dislocation. I think it's also the people who are less well off, lower income, they're not able to pay their rental and then they are turned out. I think government has made some provisions for them to go to sites. I don't know precisely the mechanics of it. I've seen both criticisms as well as people explaining how it really works and support for them. But I think if those lockdowns hadn't been imposed, the modeling suggests that India would be looking at 800,000 cases by now. And, the US, New York alone has got 300,000 cases. So there's no reason why India should not have reached seven figures, for example. And the fatality rate, given that India has, on the whole, a younger population, but a significant number of people over 60 or 55, the fatality rate, I think, would have been very different. So in terms of the saving of lives, in terms of the cost in human terms, I have to say so far, and everyone says so far, India has done an amazing job.
And what's your assessment of the global response to the coronavirus outbreak?
Global response, I think there hasn't been much of a united international response, partly because the virus came upon each country. It's a new virus. People haven't understood how it really impacts. And I think every country has been focused on the internal response. While exchanging information, WHO has been trying to bring people together. Now I notice other international organizations are thinking in financial terms, what they can do for the less developed countries. And these are initiatives to welcome. But on the medical front, I think every country has been focused on trying to deal with the problem within its borders.
There's a lot of talk of a new global order of global institutions and leading countries failing to provide leadership at a time like this, in a crisis like this. Do you believe that emerging powers like India and Singapore can play a crucial role?
2, maybe 3 points. First, I wouldn't be so critical of the existing international order. As I said, when tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people get infected within your country, where is the bandwidth to go and look at other aspects? Not that much. And particularly when your medical system is being overwhelmed. Not the case with Singapore. We have always tried to stay ahead of the curve and make sure that our medical facilities are more than adequate to deal with the situation. But Singapore is small and it is relatively wealthy and it has a first-class medical system. That's not the case with many countries, even in the developed world. I mean, the response of Germany, for example, has been outstanding, but you won't say the same of one or two other countries. So it's been varied. People, politicians, government leaders have naturally been focused on trying to save lives within their own country. So I will be less critical of the united global response. The second is Singapore cannot be mentioned in the same breath as India. We are two different sizes. Singapore is not a country that aspires to or believes realistically that it can shape global orders. I think what we can do is we are like a petri dish. Our experiences are useful for others in looking at what works and what doesn't work, and maybe replicated in a slightly different way. Cannot be replicated in the same way. India, I think, in one aspect, I haven't given a lot of thought to a globalized response, but in one critical aspect, I think India holds a lot of promise. I read a fair bit about the deep Indian capabilities in the pharmaceutical sector, both in terms of science and technology, as well as the ability to manufacture. So if and when we get to a vaccine, India would have deep capabilities to manufacture vaccines, which would help save a lot of lives around the world. And, if you take, for example, the Serum Institute, that's a leading institute, but there are many others. Serum Institute is working with Oxford. They are aiming to develop, 60 million vaccines or so. Human trials are expected to start. If it works out, it will work out very well. And other Indian companies are also trying to do it. And I've also been impressed with the way India has got to look at its large population, and the sort of amount of money that India can spend on these things is limited, or the average Indian can spend is limited. So the ability to come out, for example, with very low-cost ventilators that people can use, solutions that at a local level, whether you take Kerala, which has got, I understand, a very successful response at a community-wide level, or specific districts where the district collector has taken a very clear-eyed stand and has been able to mobilize the community and keep the transmissions and numbers down. I think the response across has been quite interesting, instructive, but on an international scale, I think India has got much to offer in terms of the productive capacity. But none of us has won this fight. And the fact that Indian numbers are relatively low, both in terms of transmission numbers and mortality rates, doesn't mean it'll stay the same in the next 6 months. So you've got to constantly be on the watch. And the same for Singapore.
Mr. K Shanmugam, thank you very much for speaking with us here on WION.
Thank you very much.